Yeah, I just screen shared and I think my video and audio should be on. Can you hear and see my slides?
We can hear you just fine in the lecture hall, and I guess that means everyone can hear you online. So we can go directly to your talk then. Okay. Again, if anyone would like to ask questions, please do so using the Menti code. Okay. Yeah. Vikash, all over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Vishakh. I'm a postdoc with Professor D.E. Yang at Stanford, and I'm very sorry I couldn't be there in person today, unfortunate visa issues. But today I'm actually very excited to share some work from our group where we were working on obtaining qualitative insights through automated interviews. And throughout this talk, we'll be considering the case of auditing the attitudes and adoption of AI in the workforce. So if I don't mention it in any slides, you can assume it's all about this task. And this work was led by this fabulous master student, David, who's part of our group right now. So broadly, I wanted to use this talk for two things. The first thing is I actually wanted to dig a little deeper into this research question of how we can discover deep qualitative insights from human participants at scale. And in the last couple of minutes, I'm hopefully going to pitch some of you some work that we're doing with the Singapore Ministry of Manpower, and we would love for you to collaborate with us. Um, yeah, so I think the motivation for this project started with the research question of when we want these deep qualitative insights, how do we proceed with this? And I think there are two specific challenges when we try to present solutions for this. Where the first challenge is that when you do data collection in this regime, you want to make sure that you're being faithful to the true depth of human experiences. So in the past, when people have done this, the tried and tested methods are like expert-led human interviews. And in these interviews or focus groups, they have like in-depth conversations with participants, which are then used to like inform either product or policy decisions. The challenge with this is that you are limited inherently by the time of your experts. And which brings me sort of to the second half of the research question, which is the challenge of how do you scale this? And in the past, when people have actually tried to like survey populations as a whole, you tend to have these sort of static design surveys that go out to with a set of questions to everyone, which means you don't have much extrapolation beyond the script that you anticipate. And so marrying these sort of two challenges, it seems like a very natural question to ask if, given that we have these high quality LLMs, can we get the best out of both of these worlds with the help of an AI interviewer? And I want to mention there have been many efforts in this space. There's a lot of research work that's come out recently, including from some frontier labs. And actually, like there's recently when I was looking up, there's also a lot of startups that all have the same AI slop website that will ask for the same question. But when we try to take a step back and try to understand a little bit more of the problem we're answering, we kind of come to this question of actually we're not even sure of what defines a high quality interview. And in a lot of the research papers that you might have seen, they have very heterogeneous evaluation, which makes it very hard to actually know how well you're actually doing. So we tried to take a step back and actually just try and define what is a version of interview utility. And we draw heavily from some references in like qualitative research theory, which I've listed below, and I'm happy to talk about more. So fundamentally, the most basic thing that you want from your interviewer is your researcher typically has some hypotheses or topics that they would like to explore. By definition, you would want to ensure that you have high coverage of the researcher's predefined topic guide. Second, you also want the interviewer to explore relevant but unanticipated topics that are brought up by the participants. And this is where the researcher might have some hypotheses and like they might follow up on participant responses, and you want this to be adaptive. So we call this emergent insights. And finally, you would also want the interviewer to be respectful of participants' time. So essentially, you don't want to be overly burdensome. So like if you can avoid like repetitive questions or something, you also want to minimize this cost to participants. So in the paper, we formalize like a goal for semi-structured interviewer as a sort of weighted version of these three goals. I'll leave the formalism, please check out the paper if you want that. But I think fundamentally, we could break down a lot of the literature into these three goals. And then if we take a step back, and review the same literature. Here, I've just listed a few different interviewers that are both commercial products as well as research projects. And if we try to analyze them from this lens of like the three goals of like semi-structured interviewers, what we find is that there is a clear gap where a lot of interviewers do prioritize this like coverage of the predefined script. But what we do notice is that there is a clear gap as a lot of methods do not prioritize this deliberate exploration in qualitative interviews. So that's where we sort of situated a lot of our research. So let's scope the question down to how can we encourage deliberate exploration in AI interviews. And I think this actually builds on from some of the work that both Lizzie and Johan mentioned before. But what we do is at a very high level, every K turns, we want to do proactive planning. So essentially, we take the most recent response. In this case, it might be the participant is just talking about how the AI cited a legal principle, but when verifying it, they realized even though it was wrong, it cleared up an assumption of the human participant themselves. So from this turn, when we do proactive planning, we simulate conversation rollouts in different directions from this particular turn. Given the history, we task the model with like simulating predicted responses to the user for these predicted questions. And we simulate multiple rollouts. For example, this first rollout digs a little deeper into the response, where you might want, here the predicted responses where the user talks about brainstorming, perhaps using the AI as a devil's advocate. And the second option could be to instead just move on to the next topic and shift gears to something else. So these are essentially two alternate versions of what you could do at this point. And when we do planning, we estimate the expected utility of all of these different rollouts. And here we go back to our formalism and figure out like which rollout is the most high utility. And we use this to prioritize directions accordingly. So at this point, you might choose to prioritize this a little further. So just to like overview again of the question, where we wanted to discover these deep qualitative insights from human participants. And what we do is we design this multi-agent system that balances coverage, which a lot of existing work does, with simulation guided exploration. That's the main technical novelty of our work. And we call this system SparkMe. We might still be in the market for a new name, so please message me if you come up with something. But essentially what we do is we have a multi-agent system that has a few other tricks to prioritize efficient coverage of the predefined guide. And we have the simulation-based step that I just mentioned below. So how do we evaluate this? So first we benchmark the performance of our interviewer with automatic experiments on user agents. I'll quickly present one plot and hopefully walk you through it. So on the y-axis here, we care about interview utility. Ideally, we want to maximize this utility over the course of the interview. And along the x-axis, we have the number of turns. So as the interview turns keep increasing, you might notice that a lot of the plots have a negative slope, and that's because it's essentially paying a higher cost as you incur like more turns. So what we do observe is that SparkMe outperforms all of the baselines, some of which are actually like commercial systems, on the automatic evaluation with user agents. And specifically, I'll draw your attention to our rollout-based technique from earlier. What we find is specifically if we ablate the presence of our simulation-based planner, we find that planning leads to discovery of more emergent insights. Essentially, when we remove the simulation-based planning, our interviewer discovers much fewer emergent insights. It just sticks to the script a little bit more. So we show that like that particular step has the value that we care about of like deeper discovery. To validate this further, we do run a user study with actual professionals where, to remind you, the task is we want to interview participants on their AI adoption and attitudes at work. We compare SparkMe with MiniTalk, which is the strongest baseline system. And like I mentioned, it's a startup that is actually like a product you can test now. And each system interviews 5 professionals from these 7 different professions. We selected these 7 professions just for like coverage of different spaces. We recruit these from a crowd working service and we interview them with both systems. So that's 2 different sets of like, participants. And essentially like experts validate the insights from other interviews in their own profession. And what we do find, so here on the radar chart, the the circular dots are our system, SparkMe, and the triangle is MimiTalk. And consistently, what we do find is that SparkMe does produce more higher quality insights, even when it's with respect to the script. And it also produces much more emergent insights, which are things we might not have anticipated in the script, but are also highly relevant. And some interesting examples we found that educators were talking about lesson planning with ChatGPT and integrating output from like Canva cleverly, as well as HR professionals who are practicing like multilinguality with ChatGPT because they find that connecting with candidates is something that's like, quite a high alpha for them right now. So it's quite cool that we're discovering almost like novel uses for AI in these professions. And sort of to answer our question, we do propose this SparkMe, a multi-agent system that balances this like high utility for the interviews, and we validate SparkMe with both automatic experiments and a human subject study. So that's kind of the takeaway of the technical aspect of this topic. There are a lot of directions to improve this, both in like evaluation, other applications, and we're like actively exploring this. So please get in touch if you're interested in any of this work. But most specifically, I want to just talk about putting our work out in the wild, where last year there was this really influential work from some of our lab mates called Work Bank, where they conducted a nationwide audit to understand what workers want. And in this study, they actually did use a static survey. But what we would like to do in the coming months is we've partnered with the Singapore Ministry of Magic, Ministry of Manpower, to sample a census representative population of the workforce and expand our interview application to interview all of these folks. We're also working with some folks from Prof. Min's lab, and this work is being led by Binwei Yao from UW Madison. And this is like super active, so I would love to hear from folks about this. I think that's all I have for you today. Please reach out. I've left my contact information on the slides, and as well both the SparkMe paper and a lot of the work from our lab on the future of work direction is on our screen. I hope it's also relevant to like tomorrow's part of the workshop. Thank you so much. Hang on. I think I'm gonna stop sharing just so I can look at the chat. Uh, yeah, I think. Yeah, okay, sweet. I think, yeah,
So
happy to
we'll
pass the
get
mic to
Kay
Kay.
up to set up first. There will be questions that you can ask. Let me just do that quickly. Okay, so you can scan the QR code and then ask your questions, but we're going to take questions after Caleb's talk so we can get both Caleb and Vishakh's talks in. And then after that, we'll adjourn for lunch. Okay, so we'll stop sharing our screen and let Caleb take the floor.